An American mechanic standing nearby grinned. That's the idea, pal. Easy to build, easy to fix, easy to use. Pavel looked up at him. How many of these do you have? The mechanic shrugged. Tens of thousands, maybe more. We make them faster than we can ship them. Pavel felt a chill run down his spine. Tens of thousands. His own country had struggled to produce enough trucks to supply the front lines, and here the Americans were churning out vehicles like they were toys. Another prisoner, a political officer named Dmitri, had a different reaction. He was suspicious, angry, even. This is capitalist excess, he said one night around a small fire. They waste resources on comfort while we win battles with our blood. Mikhail looked at him. Is it waste or is it strength? Dmitri glared. What do you mean? Mikhail gestured around the camp. Look at them, Dmitri. Their soldiers aren't starving, they aren't freezing. They have everything they need to fight, and because of that, they fight better, they move faster, they win. Dmitri opened his mouth to argue, but couldn't, because deep down, he knew Mikhail was right. The Soviet Union had sacrificed everything to stop the Germans. 20 million dead, cities destroyed, entire generations lost, and yes, they had won, but at what cost? The Americans had arrived late to the European war, but when they came with overwhelming force. They didn't just have soldiers, they had a system, an industrial base that could outproduce the entire Axis combined. One evening, Mikhail was approached by an American lieutenant. The man was young, maybe 25. He spoke a little Russian. You fought at Stalingrad? The lieutenant asked. Mikhail nodded. I did. The American's face grew serious. I've heard stories. What your men did there, it's incredible. The toughest battle in history, they say. Mikhail looked down at his hands. They were scarred and calloused. We had no choice. If Stalingrad fell, Russia fell. The lieutenant was quiet for a moment. You guys are the bravest soldiers I've ever heard of. I just wish you'd had the equipment you deserved. Mikhail met his eyes. You have more than equipment. You have everything. The lieutenant smiled sadly. Yeah, we do, and I think that's the point. We built all this so our guys wouldn't have to be as brave as yours. That sentence hit Mikhail harder than any bullet ever had. The American soldiers who arrived at the camp were different too. They moved with confidence, but not arrogance. They were well-fed, well-equipped. Their uniforms were clean. Their weapons were modern. Every man seemed to have everything he needed. When the gates of the camp finally opened, the Russian prisoners were too stunned to move at first. An American officer stepped forward. He spoke through a translator. You're free now. The war is almost over. We'll get you food, medical care, and transport. Mikhail stepped forward slowly. His legs were weak, his body malnourished, but his eyes were sharp. How? He began, his voice hoarse. How do you have so much? The American officer smiled gently. We're a big country, soldier, and we've been preparing for this. That night, the Russian prisoners were given their first real meal in months. Hot soup, fresh bread, canned meat, coffee, things they thought they'd never taste again. But as they ate, they couldn't stop talking about what they had seen. Did you count the tanks? One man asked. I stopped counting after 50, another replied. And the planes, there must have been hundreds. Mikhail sat quietly, chewing slowly. His mind was racing. He thought about his own army, the Red Army. They had fought with incredible bravery. They had bled the Germans dry on the Eastern Front. They had paid the highest price of any nation in this war. But they had done it with outdated equipment, with shortages, with sheer willpower and sacrifice. The Americans, they had done it with industry, with logistics, with a war machine that seemed limitless. Over the next few days, the Russian prisoners were processed and prepared for repatriation. During that time, they saw even more. They saw American field hospitals with equipment that looked like something from the future. X-ray machines, surgical tools, antibiotics, medicine that could save lives in hours instead of days. They saw supply depots stacked to the ceiling with everything imaginable. Spare parts, tires, fuel drums, ammunition crates, food rations, cigarettes, even chocolate bars. They saw communication equipment that allowed American commanders to talk to units hundreds of miles away in real time. One Russian prisoner, a former engineer named Pavel, was allowed to inspect an American Jeep. He ran his hands over the metal frame, studied the engine, tested the steering. It's so simple, he muttered, but so effective. Years later, Mikhail would tell his children about what he saw in 1945. He would describe the endless columns of tanks, the sky filled with planes, the supplies that never seemed to run out. And he would say something that surprised them. We won the war, yes, but the Americans, They showed us what the future would look like. His children didn't fully understand, but Mikhail did, because he had seen it with his own eyes. The American military wasn't just an army, it was a machine. A system built on industrial might, technological innovation, and organizational efficiency. And that machine had changed warfare forever. The Russian prisoners who witnessed it never forgot. They carried that image with them, the image of a power so vast, so overwhelming, that it didn't need to rely on sacrifice alone. It relied on something else. Something unstoppable. And in the years that followed, as the Cold War began and tensions rose between East and West, those former prisoners would remember. They would remember the roar of engines, the columns of tanks, the endless supplies. And they would know that the world had changed. Because in 1945, Russian prisoners of war were shocked by American military power. And that shock would echo for generations. The Americans had engineered war to minimize sacrifice. They had built machines to replace courage. They had turned industry into a weapon more powerful than any tank or bomb. And it worked. As the days passed, more Russian prisoners were gathered and transported east. They traveled in American trucks, ate American rations, and watched as the full scale of the Allied war effort unfolded before them. At one point, their convoy stopped near an airfield. Mikhail stepped out and watched as plane after plane took off. B-24 Liberators, C-47 transport planes, fighter squadrons, all moving with precision. An American airman walked by, eating an apple. "Hey buddy, want one?" he asked, offering Mikhail a second apple from his bag. Mikhail took it hesitantly. It was fresh, crisp, sweet. Where did this come from?" he asked through a translator. The airman shrugged. "Supply drop this morning. We get fresh fruit twice a week." Twice a week. Mikhail almost laughed. His own unit had gone months without fresh food, and here the Americans were eating apples like it was nothing. When the prisoners finally crossed back into Soviet-controlled territory, they were met by Red Army officers. The reception was cold, formal. "You will be debriefed," one officer said, then reassigned. Mikhail and the others were taken to a processing center. There, they were questioned for hours. What did you see? What did the Americans have? How did they fight? Mikhail answered honestly. He described the tanks, the planes, the supply lines, the organization. The officer, taking notes, frowned. "Are you exaggerating, comrade?" Mikhail shook his head. "No, comrade. If anything, I'm understating it. They have more than we can imagine." The officer leaned back in his chair. "The motherland defeated the fascists with courage and sacrifice. That is what matters." Mikhail said nothing. He knew better than to argue. But in his heart, he understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Soviet Union had won the war in the East. They had destroyed the bulk of the German army. They had paid the price in blood. But the Americans, they had won the war in a different way. They had won with factories, with engineers, with assembly lines, with a level of industrial power that made victory almost inevitable. And now, as the war ended and the world began to rebuild, that power wouldn't disappear. It would only grow. The year was 1945, and the world was still burning. In a small prisoner of war camp somewhere in central Germany, dozens of Russian soldiers sat behind barbed wire fences. They had been captured by the Germans months earlier, some even years before. They had survived the cold, the hunger, the brutality of the Eastern Front. But now, something was changing. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Not from artillery, not from tanks they recognized. This was different, deeper, more powerful. One of the prisoners, a sergeant named Mikhail Volkov, stood near the fence and squinted toward the horizon. Black smoke rose in thick columns. The sound of engines, hundreds of them, filled the air like a swarm of metal insects. "What is that?" whispered another prisoner beside him. Mikhail didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't know. For years, these men had fought the Germans with everything they had. They knew the sound of every German tank, every plane, every weapon. But this was something else entirely. Then they saw it. A column of American tanks rolled into view. Not the small, boxy tanks they were used to. These were massive. Sherman tanks. Dozens of them, moving in perfect formation. Their treads crushed everything in their path. Fence posts. Debris. The remnants of German defenses. Behind them came trucks. Endless trucks. Loaded with supplies, ammunition, food, fuel. More resources than Mikhail had seen in his entire military career. And above, the sky was filled with planes. American B-17 bombers flew in tight formations, their engines roaring like thunder. Fighter escorts darted around them, P-51 Mustangs with their sleek silver bodies cutting through the clouds. The sheer number of aircraft was overwhelming. One of the younger prisoners fell to his knees. He whispered, how many do they have? Mikhail watched in silence. He had fought for the Red Army since 1941. He had seen the siege of Leningrad. He had survived Stalingrad. He had witnessed the raw courage and sacrifice of his comrades as they pushed the Germans back, inch by bloody inch. But this was power on a scale he had never imagined.